Total War Attila is an atmospheric masterpiece. Let me explain. When I say atmosphere, I mean the overall feeling or mood that the game creates through its visuals, sound, storytelling, and gameplay. A Total War game with good atmosphere pulls me into its world. It makes me want to learn more about the historical setting that the game is portraying. And I know that many of you watching this are the exact same way. Like, sure, Total War games are wildly historically inaccurate, but it doesn't really matter. Because if they nail the vibe or the aesthetic or whatever you want to call it, all is forgiven and immersion is maintained. For most people. That's the magic of good atmosphere. And there's no Total War game that conveys its atmosphere quite like Total War Attila does. It is truly unique. Shogun 2, Medieval 1, and Napoleon are all wonderfully atmospheric games too, don't get me wrong, but here's the deal with Attila. More than any other historical Total War game, it really has a cohesive vision for the game's apocalyptic theme that is all-encompassing. It permeates its design everywhere you look. It combines well-written cutscenes, a bleak visual design, and punishing, sometimes even frustrating game mechanics to unapologetically tell you that the apocalypse is here, and you're going to have to struggle if you're going to survive it. Now first, let's talk about the setting itself. Total War Attila throws you into the chaos of the Dark Ages. This is an era that was marked by the decline of Western Rome, the migration of barbarian tribes, and the invasion of the Huns. Right from the jump, when you fire up this game, the intro cutscene opens with a map of Rome, with the narrator calling it the Eternal City. Then, the lights go out, the music turns ominous, and we transition to the outskirts of the Empire being set on fire in the darkness. There it is. Boom. Within 20 seconds, the game flawlessly executes the storytelling principle of show, don't tell. 20 seconds is all it takes for us to know exactly what this game is about. I mean, listen to this line.
Those who wore the golden wreath grew sick with every kind of wickedness.
My man is spitting. The cutscenes in this game are packed full of bangers like that. The constant references to the Book of Revelations in the writing was a genius move, guys. Connecting the narrative themes of the biblical apocalypse to the literal horsemen who bring the apocalypse in the gameplay is such clever writing, and I can't get enough of it. Then we get to the main menu where we hear this throat-singing music and see silhouettes of Hunnic horsemen slowly galloping against a red background. The visual design of Total War Attila is exceptional at conveying the bleakness of the period. The game's color palette is muted, dominated by grays and browns, reflecting a world in decline. It's muddy, it's gross, it's grimy. The lighting in the battles is often overcast, with the sun feeling almost choked out. This bleached, stylized look might not be for everybody, but there's no question that it captures the aesthetic of desperation. Now, whether you're looking at the game's campaign map or you're looking at the battlefield, you can immediately tell that this is a dying world and that the best days are behind you. It's an especially stark contrast from the game's more colorful predecessor, Total War Rome 2. The atmospheric detail in Attila goes beyond just the visuals, though. Take, for instance, the climate change mechanic. As turns progress, winters become harsher and longer. This isn't just a superficial addition. It affects your food supplies and your ability to move armies around without taking attrition. Unfortunately, this climate change mechanic is an example where the theming is so intense that it actually comes at the expense of gameplay. You see, Total War Attila has this fertility system for farmland, which is great in theory. I love the idea of it. Each region on the map has a fertility rating, and you could build wheat farms that take advantage of higher fertility regions to harvest more food for your faction. Lower fertility regions, on the other hand, have to make do with goat farms, which don't provide as much food as wheat farms do, but the trade-off is that they have a higher base food that doesn't rely on the fertility system. It's a good design, giving players choices to make depending on the region of the world that they're building their farms in. However, because the game becomes a freaking ice age halfway through the campaign, nearly all of the regions in the game eventually have low fertility, including Egypt, for Christ's sake. This makes building fertility-based farms a complete noob trap, because you'll eventually have to tear them down and replace them with goat farms anyway. This won't be the only instance of Attila's unwavering commitment to its theme coming at the detriment of gameplay, as we'll see later. The climate change mechanic itself is an example of CA pushing the gas pedal to the floor with this game's mechanics in order to serve its apocalyptic vibe. Everything is in service to the game's atmosphere. I learned from researching this video that the late antique Little Ice Age was actually a real thing. It was apparently caused by volcanic eruptions in the 6th century that that cooled the world by 2 degrees Celsius. This is a very meta example of what I said in the beginning of the video. The game inspired me to learn about the real history of the freaking Ice Age in the game. So CA took that and said, okay, let's make that happen in the game a century earlier than it happened in real life, and instead of cooling the world by 2 degrees, we'll turn the world into the fucking day after tomorrow by turn 100. Is it historically accurate that Europe turns into a glacier in 25 years? No. But does it feel like the end of the world? Yes. The political and social instability of the time is reflected in the game's diplomacy and faction mechanics. In Total War Attila, alliances are fragile and trust is a rare commodity. The numerous barbarian factions are constantly on the move, driven by hunger, the encroaching Huns, or just because you're the human player and the AI is programmed to attack you and make you miserable. Playing as the Western Roman Empire, you are beset on all sides, not just by external enemies, but by internal strife as well. Your generals might betray you because of the loyalty system, and your provinces are on the verge of rebellion seemingly at all times. This constant tension keeps you on edge, mirroring the precariousness of the historical period. To this day, completing the Western Roman Empire campaign is seen as a respected achievement by anyone familiar with the game because of how utterly masochistic it is. Western Rome feels the brunt of all of Attila's punishing game mechanics more than any other faction, but make no mistake, nobody is spared. Public order is absolutely brutal to manage in Total War Attila. I swear to God, everything in this game pisses people off. Religious differences, immigrants, hell, having to import food into a given province. Seriously, this is the only game in the series where it's not enough to have a global food supply to keep your citizens happy. If one of your provinces doesn't produce enough food to feed itself by itself, that pisses them off. And it pisses them off a lot.
I've been dreaming of that fucking lo mein all the way to fuck over here. Now who came in here and ate my shit?
The Huns, led by Attila himself, are the game's primary antagonists and are naturally a key component of building the game's atmosphere. They're not just another faction, they're an existential threat, a force of nature, and the game goes to great lengths to make sure you understand that. The entire narrative of the Grand Campaign, its cutscenes, its objectives, even the changing climate, all center around the villainous Attila and his Hunnic hordes. When Attila is born, the story moves forward, letting us know with an ominous cutscene announcing his birth, followed by a new objective to simply survive. When Attila comes of age, the game announces it with another ominous cutscene and a chilling declaration. The Scourge of God. From that point on, the Huns become an ever-present menace, their hordes roving across the map like a plague. They leave absolute desolation everywhere they go, razing city after city with awesome-looking animations. The sense of dread that they instill is palpable, and every decision that you make must consider the possibility of a Hun invasion if you live anywhere remotely near Eastern Europe. This creates a unique tension and urgency that I haven't really felt in many other Total War games, save for maybe the Chaos Invasion in Warhammer 1 or the Mongols in Medieval 1 and Medieval 2. And that's part of the genius behind this game's theming. Unlike most grand campaigns in the series, Total War Attila actually has a storyline with a typical 3-act structure and a clear antagonist. And the story moves forward with or without you. Act 1 kicks off with the intro cutscene and encompasses the early game, where you do the typical Total War thing. You fight your neighbors, secure your territory, manage your settlements, that stuff. But unlike, for example, Rome 2's Grand Campaign, where you can take all the time in the world, in Attila's, the story builds in the background with each passing turn. In the back of your mind, you always know that the winters are growing longer and that something terrible is brewing in the east. This paces the campaign, it creates momentum, and it adds an underlying urgency that's missing in some of the other titles. In Act 2, the action continues to rise as Attila takes over the Huns and begins his rampage across Eastern Europe. Even if you aren't in his immediate vicinity, you can still feel Attila's presence on the map. You just know he's in the fog of war somewhere out there, curb-stomping AI factions out of existence and turning the map into a Fallout game. The climax of the story is, of course, Attila's death, and then Act 3 is the falling action as you finish up your campaign. Unfortunately, though the Huns are narratively satisfying, they are mechanically frustrating to deal with. No matter how many stacks of Hunnic armies you kill, they will endlessly respawn until you or someone else kills Attila. These stacks are filled with incredibly powerful units too. Unlike the Chaos Invasion in Warhammer or the Sea People's invasion in PHARAOH, the Huns are just not fun to fight. Horse archers and large onagers do not make for a fun combination in an endlessly respawning antagonist faction. That being said, when Attila finally fucking dies, it is incredibly satisfying. What sets Attila apart from other Total War games is how its high difficulty and occasionally frustrating mechanics actually contribute to its theming. I mean, think about it. No other Total War game could get away with some of the flagrant bullshit that goes on in this game. If any other Total War game had these issues, like respawning cancer stacks of Hunnic cavalry and large onagers, insane public order penalties, the entirety of Europe being covered in snow 3 out of every 4 turns, the Nile River Valley being infertile for farmland, come on man, we would all dumpster this game from the rooftops. But Total War Attila? Most people just give it a pass. People buy the bullshit in this game because everything that we see, hear, and do when we're playing it tells us that we should. Everyone just kind of accepts that it's the hard Total War game that runs like garbage. That's its identity. That's Attila summed up in a sentence. It's punishing and it's unfair, just like the era it's representing. Even though CA abandoned Attila and never fixed its horrendous performance and long turn times, you can feel Attila's influence in some of the newer Total War titles. They reused the combo of an intimidating villain and a 3-act story structure in Total War Warhammer 1, with Archaon replacing Attila and Chaos replacing the Huns. And I think it works really well in Warhammer 1. Chaos is definitely more fun to fight than the Huns, but the overarching narrative isn't as strong in Warhammer 1 as it is in Attila. Attila is foreshadowed heavily and his menace is built up to over the course of the campaign, whereas Archaon just kinda shows up in a cutscene randomly and invades the world with no prior introduction. You can also feel a lot of Attila's influence in Total War PHARAOH, the game most thematically similar to Attila. PHARAOH's Bronze Age collapse setting includes all of the apocalyptic ingredients that Attila's does, and in a lot of areas, it captures that same desperate Attila vibe. But not everywhere. Compared to Attila's mood-setting opening cutscene, PHARAOH's is a tone-deaf mess, with cringe-inducing humor undermining what should be Pharaoh Meneptah giving us a foreboding speech about the coming end times. As another example, PHARAOH's Sea People's invasion doesn't evoke the same sense of dread that the Huns or even Chaos do. There's no 3-act story structure building them up, and no clear villain for us to hate. And like with Archaon's Chaos invasion, they just show up randomly in a cutscene without any foreshadowing and then invade the world. Now don't get me wrong, PHARAOH does have some of Attila's apocalyptic special sauce, with the civilization collapse mechanic, the Sea Peoples raising settlements all across the world, and the fact that the game's visuals begin to darken and lose their color as the light of civilization is snuffed out. Guys, that effect in particular looks really fucking awesome and does a lot of heavy lifting for that game's apocalyptic atmosphere. I mean, look at this, it looks like the sky is on fire. I plan on doing a separate video on PHARAOH's atmosphere because when it hits, it really hits. But when you look at the overall package, Attila just executes the end of the world vibe better. In essence, Total War Attila sacrifices some gameplay balance to fully embrace its apocalyptic theme. It's an experience that, while challenging and sometimes frustrating, is nevertheless deeply atmospheric and thematically coherent in a way that, I believe, is unique in the Total War series. Thank you so much for watching, and for making it to the end of the video. If you enjoyed it, please consider leaving a like, as it really helps me out. Let me know down below what your thoughts are on Total War Attila, and what your thoughts are on the most atmospheric game in this series. Take care everyone, and I will see you in the next one.